At the opening of the invasion at midnight, as the tandem anti-satellite and cyber strikes hit America hard, making it essentially deaf, dumb, and blind, as the saying went, the electronic warfare systems were booted on by units such as the 58th Signit/EW Regiment, which was responsible for signals intelligence, electronic intelligence, or ELINT, as well as electronic warfare, having separate battalions for each, as well as a security and support company and a headquarters company within its regiment. The independent headquarters battalion encapsulated the command elements over the entire 58th PLA Group Army, which consisted of 7 full brigades, most of which being combined arms brigades, including 1 heavy combined arms brigade being the 28th, with an aviation regiment, the 58th Aviation. This regiment had a transport battalion consisting of Z-20 utility helicopters. It had a reconnaissance battalion consisting of the Z-11WA armed reconnaissance helicopters, and of course an attack helicopter battalion consisting of the Z-10 attack helicopters, as well as a maintenance company, security and support company, and a headquarters company over the regiment. As many actions were beginning to unfold within the initiation of hostilities at midnight, due to the fact that the command on the ground for this battle occurring within the invasion wanted to essentially begin operations as close to the anticipated air cover arriving as possible, the artillery barrage didn't start until 12:30 a.m., or approximately 30 minutes after the electronic warfare systems went online, and the WZ-8 high-altitude stealth drones, 2 of which were launched from the same CCP property upon which sat the 58th Aviation Regiment from its makeshift runways, which were dirt runways, able to support the operation of these drones. As that was occurring and the drones were airborne, the units began to move in earnest to first conduct flank clearing operations on the edges of the city before moving in like spokes on a wheel heading for the center. Most of their axes of advance being along major interstate or state highways, which they would essentially go after key nodes first before then fanning out and clearing entire areas of responsibility, as each combined arms brigade took a segment of the city upon themselves for which they were responsible for the clearance thereof. At the initiation of the actual combat at 12:30, when the first artillery shells from the artillery battalion of the 53rd Combined Arms Brigade began to fire its PLZ 05 155mm howitzers upon the air installation, this barrage had been kept up in earnest in order for units on the ground to swiftly move in to prepare for their assault to overrun portions of the facility, while other portions were slated by destruction by tactical ballistic missile, cruise missile, or airstrikes. As, again, this installation, this Tinker Air Base, was a very vital U.S. Air Force installation, being the premier air logistical center and able to repair much of the Air Force's largest aircraft, including its strategic bombers in the form of B-1Bs and also the B-52 Stratofortresses. There were also even construction for hangars for maintenance of the new B-21 Raider. This, as well as mid-air refuelers, which were also stationed there as per the reserves, and as well as E3 aircraft, which there were a sufficient number of these AWACS aircraft, including even naval E-6B aircraft, in the form of the Navy's Fleet Recon Squadrons 3, 4, and 7, and the Navy also had a weapons school at the Tinker Air Force Base to boot. As the air base itself had many different tenant units, it was a fairly populated installation of roughly 30,000 military and civilian employee personnel. It was a fairly large installation, especially from north to south, encompassing over a dozen miles from north to south and roughly 4 miles east to west, and therefore would require intensive air strikes, missile strikes, and of course being surrounded and overran by a mixture of a Mechanized Infantry Battalion, a Combat Engineer Battalion, and an Armored Bttn, all coming from the 53rd Combined Arms Brigade, which would at first surround the facility while the air assets went in to carpet munition it, as well as JH-7s conducting precision airstrikes, as well as 155mm artillery strikes, before then going in to overrun and net any POWs or eliminate any resistors that remained. Fully conscious of the American Army units in the form of the Guard units in the area from the 45th Infantry Brigade combat team, the intelligence assessments obtained by the Chinese, which helped shape their battle plan, were well informed of the fact that the 1st Battalion of the 179th Infantry Regiment, which was this force right here, had been deployed in the area, and due to a lack of billeting available on the installation, had set up a temporary bivouac area or campsite located at a warehouse facility that lay in between the General Atomic Power Station and the Tinker Air Force Base, tentatively responsible for both, for the security thereof, as in the similar regard to the American Army forces from TRADOC that were sent from Fort Sill to bolster security at the Shepherd Air Base. Much of the same situation was going on here, only with National Guard forces in lieu of active duty forces to conduct the same types of operations. As in the general sense, throughout the entire Oklahoma City area, National Guard forces were tasked by the state, with the approval of the federal regime, with guarding key infrastructure, as Tinker was also considered key infrastructure as an installation, as well as many of the water and sewage treatment facilities here in the black, as well as power plants in the yellow, including the Walters Power International right here, the OG&E Mustang plant, the gas plant, as well as the OG&E Frontier plant right here. And the green being the Guard armories, which were now at this time, after 1230, beginning to be hit by tactical ballistic missile strikes from DF-3As, also DF-21As, and DF-4s, coming from the different forces in Mexico, as well as the 616th Strategic Missile Forces Brigade, which itself was a Trojan unit in eastern Texas adjacent to Austin, able to fully reach Oklahoma City and Tulsa with their DF-21A systems, as they operated 4 different missile systems within their specific brigade. The 612th and 613th in Mexico operating not just their standard tactical ballistic missiles of the newer varieties, including even hypersonic cruise missiles like the DF-100, as well as the DF-17 and DF-ZF, which is a hypersonic glide warhead, and others, but they were also having reserve forces bolster their ranks, able to fire older and very numerous additional systems, such as the DF2s and DF3As, which could be TEL fired, as well as the DF4s, which were more limited in number but could be fired from special scaffolding and had an exceedingly long range and an enormous payload. These forces, now having fired off their first salvos, in addition to the artillery fire, now lasting roughly an hour, led into this Mechanized Infantry Battalion of the 53rd Combined Arms Brigade, completely smashing this group of armed civilians that at first was targeted by artillery and then scattered and fled to a nearby water treatment plant, where a battle ensued before this battalion crossed I-240 right here, this ring road that went around the city. And they, upon doing so, set up their fire support company to begin firing their PLL-05 heavy assault gun mortars, which were 120 millimeter, in addition to their shorter range multiple launch rocket systems, which were 130 millimeter, essentially light artillery systems, which they had a fire support company within their battalion, with a headquarters company and the rest being mechanized infantry. In addition to this, while this fighting was going on here, before this battalion fanned out upon completing this and capturing this water treatment plant before crossing the highway and fanning out and establishing themselves as a perimeter force, at the same time, a combat engineer battalion and armored battalion were moving through the area and moving along I-40 before embarking against and forming an eastern perimeter facing west against the Tinker Air Force Base. Again, as Oklahoma City was a major military-industrial target due to the aviation plants and offices located prominently within the city, many of those were already slated for targeting by a whole variety, a whole slew of different systems, whether it be the howitzer-based artillery, whether it be long-range rocket artillery coming from the A300s from down in the Fort Sill area, fired by the 77th Group Army's 77th Artillery Brigade's battalion of the A300s, or whether it was the tactical ballistic missiles or the about-to-fire in humongous salvos, YJ-18C or Club K, which were the calibers-based cruise missile systems fired from container-based systems. These would hit various key targets throughout the entire Oklahoma City area. And even as the forces were moving in to completely overrun Tinker Air Force Base, their air support and air power in the form of their heavy strategic bombers, two of which coming from an H-6K squadron operating in northern Texas and southeastern Oklahoma at the time, and another two coming from an H-20 squadron of the brand new H-20 stealth bombers. These could carry almost 3 times the payload of the older H-6, although the older H-6 had electronic warfare systems such as the KG-600 equipped upon them, which added advantage to their use as well. So the H-20 had the stealth advantage, while these had the electronic warfare advantage. By some metrics, the electronic warfare advantage was even better because it outright nullified radar altogether. While this was occurring, while these aviation assets were now coming into place, including mid-air refuelers that were operating throughout the Red River area between straddling Texas and Oklahoma for all of these different aircraft operating in these different battles throughout Oklahoma and northern Texas to use, these JH-7s began to break off of their squadron to go for their different objectives. Some would be used for close air support of the forces on the ground, while others would take key specific targets within the Tinker Air Force Base itself, such as hangars and aircraft and even certain buildings that had been slated according to the original war plans for complete destruction. in addition to the artillery fire, as well as incoming tactical ballistic missiles and soon-to-be-fired cruise missiles, in conjunction with the heavy strategic bombing raids, with the heavy strategic bombers not even using their full payloads on the Tinker Air Force Base itself, saving plenty for other targets throughout the city. As in conjunction with the artillery fire, the cruise and tactical ballistic missile fire, and the artillery howitzer fire, there would be more than enough munitions to essentially saturate the entire facility by the time it was called for the armored forces to smash their way in with the combat engineers, who were now forming a perimeter to block escape and also block a hastily assembled rescue mission, as it was the job of the 1st of the 179th to essentially help secure this facility in the first place. But because of their communications down, it literally took them over an hour after the first howitzer salvos were fired to be able to get organized enough to where at the company level they could begin to move towards Tinker in an effort to try to relieve the installation and break through the line of different mechanized infantry companies that had now fanned out around its western side, while it was being heavily shelled and about to be heavily attacked from the air, and it was already beginning to be attacked by certain tactical ballistic missile systems, soon to be joined by cruise missiles. As it was now 1:40 a.m., as Chinese forces had left their CCP regime properties all throughout the area and now proceeded to smash their way into the installation upon having had surrounded it, the first initial air raids were now coming in, as the headquarters battalion's dedicated drone section, as in the headquarters battalion over this 53rd Combined Arms Brigade, had fired a salvo of 48 Ch1nese loitering munitions set on AI targeting mode to aid their troops on the ground, as ISR assets had spotted the 1st of the 179th headed towards the Tinker Air Force Base to make the short journey. We go to the map of the southwest corner of the base itself, with this being the outer perimeter fence right here. As these troops had made a ring around basically the entire air base, stretching their companies out all along its perimeter before preparing to rush in, what had occurred was that of the 30,000 civilian and military personnel on the installation, soon to be joined and also by an entrapped 1st of the 179th, as they would become trapped inside the installation and go down swinging, they were trying to put up the best defense they could at the perimeter, as the vehicles of the mechanized infantry forces, thereby supported by CH-901As, beginning to enter the area, as this was a regular active duty PLA group army. They were equipped with some of the newest and best of the PLA's platforms, including the mechanized infantry troops being equipped with the new VN-20 infantry fighting vehicles, which were a step up from the already quite advanced ZBD-04As, with much of the same technology, but with greater armor protection and a lower silhouette, and even some additional new features. And we're also equipped with the Type 89A armor personnel carriers, as well as PLL-05s, and of course their multiple launch 130mm short-range light artillery rocket systems, the Type 63s, which equipped their fire support company. They had a platoon of PLL-05s and 2 platoons of the Type 63 multiple launch rocket systems. And therefore, their fire support company of this single mechanized infantry battalion, this is only one company. There are more companies along the perimeter, were now beginning to engage with the base security forces, as the force posture around this installation had been essentially one that had been roughly at the same level as that of Fort Hood, where most of the forces were not armed at the time. In fact, the only ones armed on this installation officially were the base security forces and the incoming 1st of the 179th trying to relieve the embattled Air Force Base as it was being savagely attacked by PLA troops. As the heavy strategic bomber aircraft and artillery came in, the artillery simply pummeled many of the structures on the installation, and as these troops right here were running by, they were getting mauled by the artillery. This H-20 heavy strategic bomber aircraft beginning to drop thousands of tons of munitions in a straight line through the southern part of this installation, moving up to the north. This was only one small part of this larger battle, as there are two subcomponent maps of the whole air base battle at the Tinker Air Base. This just being the southernmost corner of it in the southwest corner. This being one of the two H-6K heavy strategic bombers dropping its massive payload in a straight line, both going up through the installation, as by now, as this map is breaking out, it is 2 a.m., or 2 hours into the invasion, after the mechanized infantry forces had crushed the armed civilians that had fled into the water treatment facility before then crossing and preparing to assault the installation itself. Now, by the showing of this map, the first salvos of YJ-18C supersonic cruise missiles, or Caliber Club K cruise missiles, are beginning to fire from container-based systems hidden all throughout the country, as there are many thousands of these missiles. Some 40,000 in total would be fired throughout the country on timed salvos from a total of these 10,000 of these container systems, as each boasted 4 missiles apiece. And here's 4 altogether right here flying into the installation. These are JH-7s coming in to conduct a precision strike operation on this taxiway and these different maintenance hangars right here. These are ordinary buildings right here and parking lots. These have been smashed already by the enormous air raid right here. This is the barrier at the end of this road right here that goes, it's the barrier between the runway and the road right here that leads to these different buildings and parking lots. And these are hangars, whether they're maintenance hangars. This is a B-1B, and some of these are hangars, of course, throughout this airbase for the fleet of E-3 AWACS aircraft, as well as the E-6Bs of the Navy. There's also KC-135 fuelers and other different types of aircraft. There are only 5 B-1Bs here from Dyess Air Force Base at the time of the invasion, as Dyess itself was under heavy assault from missiles and airstrikes, itself about to be overrun by Sino-Russian forces from Central Texas. Upon their completion of the Fort Hood battle and the Waco battles, they would continue on fanning out into tertiary areas and would overrun the already badly battered installation of Dyess, already basically laid waste by intensive cruise and tactical ballistic missile strikes throughout it, sort of like what occurred with Holloman, as well as airstrikes. This base being in the way of the 58th Group Army's ground forces, so it is being overrun in conjunction with being carpet munition. And here's a H-20 flying that hasn't dropped anything yet insofar as payloads. See the B-1B on the tarmac here on the taxiway. Bunker's about to get hit by all these dropped munitions. This building's about to get hit by this one. And you have some CH-901As flying north off the map, between this portion of the installation and the other sub-battle map is about 1 kilometer, so there's an additional runway beyond this fencing right here that goes further to the north. And essentially, what happens is from outside the installation on these streets that run past it in the city, what you have here is you have dismounted troops in the form of basically a platoon. What you have here, a dismounted platoon. This is in a wedge formation. They just exited their armor personnel carriers and infantry fighting vehicle of their platoon of vehicles. They have 3 combat platoons of vehicles, which is 3 infantry fighting vehicles, the VN-20s, and 4 Type 89As apiece per combat platoon, and this is their headquarters platoon right here. This is one platoon about to smash their way through the fencing, and this is the 2 other vehicle platoons about to smash their way in to secure the southern end of the runway after this raid has occurred and passed. And what's going on here is this dismounted platoon is securing the flanks by taking on this base security element right here, engaging with these MRAPs and troops that are these Air Force base security troops that are in double column formation behind their, doing a rolling shield behind their MRAPs, essentially, with their M250 cals mounted on top, trying to fire back and put up a fight. With this one actually rolling up towards the gate on this street here inside the base perimeter, along this perimeter road, before dismounting its squad. But the whole time, it's getting hit. It's getting fired at by 100mm infantry fighting vehicle shells from their main guns, which is almost like a tank shell size, as at 100mm. They also are being fired at by 30mm autocannon ammunition. 12.7mm machine gun turrets are firing at them, as well as you have Ch1nese loitering munitions coming in and hitting them. These are armed with HE warheads. Instead of the fragmentation or the heat, they're armed with the HE. And they're coming in on essentially AI targeting mode and hitting these forces as they try to advance against the perimeter fencing to try to hold these forces and hit them on their flanks. But they all have their weapons oriented this way, so they're all dumping heavy fire into these forces. And you have a line formation right here along the perimeter trying to fire at these dismounts, who at the time you have one squad going into this building and clearing this building, along with this squad going in and clearing it as well. You have 2 squads clearing this large building, going through this parking lot here, while this one's maneuvering around and then maneuvering to the corner and dropping in the prone, while this one's moving and dropping and laying down fire. And then they all, 1, 2, 3, and 4, these 4 squads, leaving 1 in here, all break through the fencing. They tactically bound in cover. This one lays down fire this way and this way in the wedge, in the prone, while these vehicles are also opening heavy fire. And while that's happening, these troops run out the building and break through the fencing, the flimsy perimeter fencing, and smash their way into the installation after this vehicle's been destroyed by an anti-tank missile, like an HJ-08. And this squad does the same here, getting into the installation. They've already been wiped out running by artillery blasting, and these 2 have been wiped out essentially. And while that's going on, you have the star formation of these Tiger MRAPs around the headquarters platoon's vehicles, like their armored recovery vehicle, the fuel truck, the 2 Shangji trucks, and you have this platoon breaking through the fence while this one breaks through. They're holding this side right here. They've wiped out these guys with their weapons firing through the fencing, and they just smash through it. And then these 10 vehicles of these 2 combat platoons go around here, and you end up having 5 going this way to watch down this way after this heavy air raid has come through and smashed everything. And then you have the other 5 come this way before dismounting a squad, where this little arrow is. They dismount a squad on foot. And that's after they smash through the perimeter fence and smash through the airfield fence, because there's fencing right here, but it's been completely annihilated by the first munitions dropped right here. As you can see, the fence is completely smashed and wrecked, and you have imminent artillery strikes on this road, likely a terrain denial operation to prevent any reinforcements from getting to the perimeter to fight these troops now storming the installation. All of these buildings have been reduced to rubble by the intensive carpet munitions dropped upon them, as well as these artillery strikes occurring right here all throughout this area. This building's completely leveled. This one's leveled. These are about to get hit by artillery. They're also getting hit by airdrop munitions. You have all these guys running, but the arrows surrounded in red, which means they're decimated by artillery and also the airdropped munitions. These are each 1,000 pounds. So they're going to do enormous damage to the runway and the hangars, as well as right here. And this group's eliminated by that. This group running up here gets eliminated by the artillery strikes. There's also the HE-laden Ch1nese hitting these groups of troops running out of these hangars. They all get decimated by the different munitions as they land and blast. It'd be like hitting here, 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 and just level this entire area, including this aircraft on the runway, on this taxiway. And then what you have going on up here is, as this H6K is flying through the area, shredding these buildings, knocking them all down to piles of rubble, basically. You have this building, as this is right here at this very second, this building's already gutted, but it's about to be completely leveled as it continues on dropping its payload. These trucks are going to be destroyed. Right up here, you have 120mm mortars fired from the PLL-05s landing here, 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 cutting down these groupings of airmen and naval personnel running around through the installation, trying to get out of this hot zone, trying to get out of this area, but they're being hit by mortars. They're being hit by incoming loitering munitions, cruise missiles, artillery strikes, air raids. The air raids especially are extremely destructive. This one hasn't even begun to drop its payload yet. You have the cruise missiles flying in. And essentially this, at the opening of the battle for the Tinker Air Base, is what the southwestmost corner of it looks like. It's completely smashed into ruination, and also being penetrated by the surrounding companies of mechanized infantry that are ringing the installation on its western side, smashing in toward the east and northeast. This is just the opening moves. These are the first moves of the overrunning of the installation. All of this happens, this air raid and the missiles flying in and the aircraft in their artillery. This all happens in a matter of minutes, and it continues on from there, because once these forces have penetrated the area, they're free to move about the installation and cordon and sweep it and check the rubble and basically do a battle damage assessment or check for survivors, capture any prisoners, or eliminate anybody that is still somehow miraculously alive and tries to fight back. But they're just being hit by way too many things. There's likely no survivors other than a very scant few that somehow, some way, some miracle, they made it through all this. It was enormous, the destruction here. And then this map, being roughly a 1.5 by 1 mile map of the southwest part of the installation, going 1 kilometer north. During the rest of the battle, what's going on here is, as the installation between 1:30 and 2 begins to be surrounded and then basically overran by Amer1can Combat Engineers, Mechanized Infantry, the forces of the 1st of the 179th trying to enter to relieve and reinforce, or maybe even break out any friendly you operate this completely, as this map shows the forces of the 1st of the 179th, which consists essentially of its headquarters company, or HHC, its Alpha Company, Bravo Company, Charlie Company, and Delta Company, which Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie, or A, B, and C Co, are rifle companies, and D Co, or Delta Co, is a heavy weapons company, and H Co, or Hotel Company, is a forward support company from the 700th Support Battalion, another unit present at the larger Oklahoma City battle. But essentially, at this point, the mechanized infantry forces a kilometer north of the southwest part of the map that was just shown have smashed their way in their area on the map. And on the west, or the east part of the map, going west, is the tank battalion, or the armored battalion rather, of the 53rd Combined Arms Brigade, which consists of its tank companies, its 2 armored infantry or mechanized infantry companies that are attached to armored forces essentially, as well as an anti-tank company, and of course its headquarters company comprising that battalion. And what is going on here is essentially more of what was going on just to the south, a kilometer away, with the heavy strategic bombing raids about to lift up due to not wanting to risk any friendly fire incidences. And of course, by this point, everything to the south had been already smashed as these strategic bombers quickly moved through the area and quickly jettisoned their payloads, therefore destroying everything in their wake. So any of the hangars, including those off the map, as there's more off map and to the west from this segment, as this segment's only 1.5 miles long of the installation, and there's more to the north of barracks and administrative buildings and more of the installation. This is the portion that consists of the rest of the runways and also the taxiways, the tarmacs that lead to more hangars, whether they're maintenance hangars or they're actual storage hangars for the 3s that are stationed here, or the KC-135s, which belong to the reserves, as the air installation here hosts some of the major units, being the main tenant unit as the 72nd Air Base Wing, as well as the 72nd Medical Group, 72nd Air Base Wing Headquarters, which is the command, the Air Force Sustainment Center, the 448th Supply Chain Management Wing. Of course, there's the OKC Air Logistics Complex, which, again, this is the biggest or most important or premier air logistical complex in the country. Warner Robins in Georgia is another one, and as is Ogden at the Hill Air Force Base in Utah, but those take a back seat to this place. This place had the capabilities to essentially maintain and operate and restore most of America's largest aircraft. Essentially, this was the main place for basically maintaining heavy strategic bombers, such as the large B-52 Stratofortress, the large B-1B strategic bomber, and also the AWACS aircraft and fuelers. This was a very important installation. This was a big part of the U.S. Air Force's ability to conduct operations as a whole. And much of this capability was centralized right here, and it was being completely annihilated, along with the military-industrial plants that serviced this infrastructure and comprised part of the base of the infrastructure itself, including the new GM facility, which was a GM plant that was retasked as a repair maintenance center and a manufacturing center with a consortium of different aviation companies working to manufacture parts and also aid in the maintenance and refurbishment of aircraft, which was sort of an annex to the Tinker Air Force Base, and it also itself had been heavily carpet munitioned by the 4 different strat bombers, the 2 H-6Ks and 2 H-20s that had been tasked with this battle space. Of course, they didn't have to use all their munitions on the installation, again, because there was so much field artillery usage, cruise and tactical ballistic missile usage, and also pinpoint precision strikes from JH-7s coming in and dropping their payloads on certain hangars. The sheer combo of all of these different things, these different munitions, these different items, ensured that the installation was firmly destroyed before it was even being overrun minutes later, after the heavy air raids came in by the armored forces, combat engineers, and the mechanized infantry companies comprising the Mechanized Infantry Battalion, now beginning to overrun the installation. At this area right here, this is this part of the map right here, where the 1st of the 179th is entering the area. And on the opposite side, as I-40 literally ran right through the base area, the armored forces were smashing their way in along that corridor because, again, not only was this airbase a high priority, but control of the interstates was high priority, and there could be no military resistance whatsoever at all threatening any of the major invasion/logistical routes, as that was part of the invasion plan. That was a critical keystone of it. And these mechanized infantry forces were dismounting troops and clearing out whatever surviving buildings hadn't been completely obliterated by this point, and their vehicles were taking a position to lay down heavy volumes of fire on areas where there were still surviving American Air Force or naval personnel on the installation, such as on this runway. This is a military fire truck trying to put out earlier fires that broke out from artillery shelling that destroyed this hangar right here. And they arrived on scene after this tactical ballistic missile completely obliterated a building that was right here too, another hangar right here. And this area is being completely demolished by 155 artillery shells right up here. And there's imminent strike markers all throughout this area, this parking lot with all these military trucks, these LMTVs right here, and more. These groups of troops, this is the other B-1B that was being maintained. It's about to be annihilated by the JH-7 dropping its payload right here. This JH-7 is pulling up after dropping some unguided munitions on this runway area right here where there was another aircraft on the tarmac. And this one was destroyed by proxy because it was too close to the blasts. This was an E3 right here. And this is another E3 about to get completely carpeted by artillery shells, 155 shells. These have all been marked for imminent strikes by the ISR assets, as everything in this battle, like all the others, is ISR and AI directed. As the missile strikes, any changing targets, all of it is steadily updated as the fluid battlefield conditions changed. And everybody on the ground was constantly updated and also advised as far as ground commanders on how best to deploy and where to deploy and how best to use their resources and troops, including up here where there was contact made between Alpha Company, which is right up here with their M113s and Bradleys moving into the area, and there's some MRAPs of base security right here, and there's a mixture of troops trying to hold this parade field right here in wedge formations and a diamond formation, and there's a double column formation along between these barracks buildings, and this MRAP right here trying to lay down fire over these men in the prone position, trying to give them some fire support, but they're about to get hit and destroyed by these Ch1nese, which are also going to go for the lighter protected M113s instead of the Bradleys, because the Bradley can actually survive an HE round from this. It would damage it badly, but the heat round would have been the best use for the Bradley. But in lieu of that, since there's armor advancing down the streets of the base in the form of the tank companies belonging to the Armored Bttn, they're maneuvering through the base. What you have here is one full tank company in the form of 2 tank platoons moving down this street, with another one here and another one here of the same company. This is just one company. The other companies are still spread out and clearing their areas of the installation. After this company moves through, this one moves down in this area here after this artillery's already struck. These guys running out of this building have been cut down by turret machine gun fire and coax machine gun fire, as have these guys as they ran out after this platoon of tanks drove by the building. So they're firing back at them as this tank's turret is oriented towards the rear to protect the rear in a 360-degree security, as they had staggered guns. This one facing front and sweeping side to side, this one facing this way, this one facing this way, this one facing this way, and that one facing the back, completely sweeping their sectors of fire. Before this tank platoon moves around this set of buildings, it pauses here and then continues to move around to sweep this area. And again, there were other tank platoons and also armored infantry that were supporting the tanks, as that was their job as armored infantry. They were paired with the armored forces. They were part of the Armored Bttn. They were going through and thoroughly clearing buildings within their sector that hadn't as of yet been completely reduced to rubble, like this one right here, or these, and others. As Alpha Company tried to move through this area and into this parking lot, they began to get hit again by Ch1nese that, due to their parameters set for their AI targeting, due to the warhead types they had, the HE, they went straight for the armor personnel carriers, destroying them, as they could take the M113s with the HE warheads, but the Bradleys had to be destroyed by tank fire. And as these forces tried to run across the street, they were cut down. All of these men were cut down. And this group stopped right here and was being fired at. As you can see, they're taking fire from this angle. And then before they ran, and they were cut down trying to get across the street by these tanks firing straight ahead. And as the armor moved forward and could see through the buildings at these Bradleys that survived out of the column that was being hit by these Ch1nese, they began to fire their tank shells at the Bradleys. Their heat shells were enough to rip a Bradley to pieces, and they fired their standard heat shells at these Bradleys and tore them up. And as that was going on, as all these Ch1nese were going through for the armor personnel carriers, this mechanized infantry platoon right here out of this company, as there were 2 companies in the area. There was one right here, and then there was one right behind it. And this is the headquarters platoon for the company. This platoon right here dismounted all their troops and cleared these buildings while others went around through in between the buildings and dropped in the prone while they received fire support from their infantry fighting vehicle, firing 100mm shells at this group of troops, as well as 30mm autocannon ammunition, not just at these troops, but beyond, at the vehicles passing through these buildings that could be seen. And they were tearing those M113s apart that weren't already destroyed by these Ch1nese. And these ground troops were armed with Type 69 RPG systems, which could destroy an armor personnel carrier with the anti-tank ammunition for it, and the armor personnel ammunition was especially dangerous. And they also had tube-fired 35mm grenades from beneath their rifle barrels of their QBZ-95s. So they also had light machine guns, and at the squad level, like squad automatic weapons, they were laying down heavy fire, 5.8 by 42mm rounds, and they were just cutting these guys up. And they exchanged fire. It wasn't all one-sided. The Chinese took a few KIAs in this back and forth here, but eventually this group right here was cut down completely, although they put up a good fight. And the rest of these forces were completely slaughtered once the armor made it to this intersection. They were in full control. Also, this tank platoon right here, as it moved here, it began to cut through this area by this rubble, through these parking lots, around through here, and then it smashed through this fencing. And then when it got to here, the tanks all went different ways to take different sectors of fire. And even a few went a little further and held this runway right here after it had been thoroughly smashed by artillery and air power and cruise missile strikes. And over here, these forces were running through this parking lot behind a bunch of parked cars and other debris and rubble, as this place had been hit by artillery, as you can see, in a cruise missile strike. And there's rubble buildings. You can see that they spotted the Chi-Coms and tried to turn around and flee, but they were cut down by all the 12.7mm fire that shredded through all the vehicles parked here and hit all these guys and wiped them all out. They didn't even make it. They were gone. These guys were already cut down right away. And these guys, while they were being fired upon, tried to run, and bit by bit they were getting cut down, as the red indicates right here. And as they cleared buildings, and these troops cleared these buildings in this area right here, they continued to bound and cover tactically, as you can see. They bounded here to the end, held the corners, and then these guys in the middle bounded, and then they bounded, and then they bounded. As you can see by the arrows, they lay down fire. The other moves, they stop, they lay down fire. Then the other moves, they stop, lay down fire, and they leapfrog ahead that way. Tactically, by the time they got here, they were laying down fire through here. But by this time, as the tanks made it here and began to fan out and spread out, Alpha Company was gone. And further up, there were more fighting going on with the other tank companies of the Armored Company, as well as the Armored Infantry and the Anti-Tank Company, firing their HJ-08 anti-tank missiles from their AFT-10s, which were very powerful and had long range for an anti-tank system, and it was all drone-directed. They all used their reconnaissance assets to the maximum, their quadcopter, squad-level, and platoon-level reconnaissance drones, and they could see the Americans before the Americans even knew what hit them, essentially. And by the time this battle was over with, for the entire base, it lasted a grand total of 25 minutes, and much of that time was spent maneuvering just to seize total control of it and sweep it. At the end of the battle, the first of the 179th had been completely annihilated and destroyed, and after the battle ended, the Mechanized Infantry Battalion, responsible for holding the western cordon, advanced on the power plant and captured it, while the rest of the forces would leave behind a contingent to guard and continue to hold down the facility, while others would advance towards the downtown area. As this was even happening and unfolding, many other battles were going on between 1:30 and 2:30 as well, many of them, and more will be explored in the next videos of the Battle of Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, of the South Central Invasion Sector Hypothetical Documentary Series.